So, quick roundup of business before we get into the questions and hear more from David and Dan, less from me. The first thing that I want to talk about is the mentoring scheme. That we had 353 responses to that, of which 70% of people wanted to be mentees, 30% of people wanted to be mentors. But with a bit of jiggling, there are 6 volunteers currently pairing everybody up this week. And we hope to email everybody by the end of the week to know who your mentor-mentee pair is. I don't think we even asked David or Dan, but imagine being mentored by one of them.
God help you.
I could only imagine how that would go. Then we're going to do a training and intro session on April the 15th, which is a week on Wednesday, so that everybody should know by the end of the week who they're going to be mentored with. And yeah, a lot of people.
You should announce it like the World Cup.
We should pulling balls out of each one, yeah. Where it's kind of like, I'd hear Accrington Stanley have got the second ball, not for the likes of us. Now, for those people who are new to this and going, oh, where was the mentoring scheme? Then where have you been for the last 3 weeks? It's all been banging on about. But applications are closed at the moment, but we'll see how we can get on, if we can try and pair up the 353 people that have already applied for that. So we are incredibly fortunate in some ways to have David Arnold and Dan Pemberton with us. So just to prove that he is actually here is Mr. David Arnold. Welcome to you, David. Thank you very much for joining us. You're presumably, you look like you're actually on a spaceship right now. Is this what composers
Very
do?
disappointing. Yeah.
I'm very happy to be here on March the 29th. Yeah.
This is a recorded message, one that you've had earlier.
Yeah, no, I'm definitely here. Michael, can I ask you a question?
Yeah, you can.
Why have you got tiny showers above your bed?
So because one of the best things about all these Zooming is so that everybody can see what everybody else's spare room looks like. So these are obviously tiny showers which are controlled from a central iPhone that I have, so that if guests are unpleasant during dinner, then later at night I can spray them with some noxious chemicals and get them to leave.
Did Nick sort that out for you?
Yeah, no, I couldn't work out the iPad controls for them, and he's put the chemicals in. That's working very well.
You want to like assign to a MIDI controller. A filter. You open the filter up, the shower gets more hot.
I think some mod wheel up, mod wheel down, maybe pitch bend, depending on who's in the spare room at that time. The other wonderful person that you can hear is Mr. Daniel Pemberton, surrounded by instruments behind you. There's a fine selection.
I do music. Here's musical instruments, which I can't play very well. And I'm very happy to join Michael Price on the 6th of April on his webinar chat.
Excellent work, gentlemen. So the format today is going to be.
I like it that Daniel is disguised as a packet of refreshers.
Which fit all the top half of one of those ice creams that are shaped like a little rocket. Fab, which is a quality lolly of choice.
I like toffee crumbles made by Lion's Made as well. Can't get those very well because Wolves took over the ice cream market. Capitalism. Disgraceful.
So were they thus pushing out acceptable and delicious other ice cream products? That's not fair.
They got bullied by Wolves took over the ice cream market and squashed out Lion's Made. So it's very hard to find places that sell Lion's Made ice lollies anymore.
It's weird, isn't it? It's weird, like Wolves do sausages and ice cream, but you don't do a sausage ice cream.
See, I never ate their sausages because I heard that Wolves have ears.
Oh, strong. There should be. Is there a virtual version of some soft fruit being thrown off the screen?
Everyone tuned in.
Look, if you do throw any fruit at him, you know he's going to sample the sound of it, and it'll be in his next film, right?
It will. There'll be some behind-the-scenes content which will work for you.
I just dropped a tomato on the floor. Now listen.
Right. Here's some questions. I mean, I say questions. So the alleged format was supposed to be that questions and answers to you gentlemen, and in the words of all these kind of shows, there was an unprecedented response, which doesn't really ever mean anything, but actually there were quite a lot of questions, and I've sort of grouped them together into rough areas, rough subject areas. So I'm going to just read a few out, and then if you gentlemen would like to give your learned opinions on them, that the waiting audience will be thrilled. The first set of questions are about starting out. So I've got three here that I'm going to stick all together. One from Jazzy. He's a beginner composer, or she, I don't know. It's I don't have big names under my belt now, but if a director comes to me and they ask, if you've done a big project, what would you do? And also Michael England, what do you suggest to those who are starting out? And I've lumped Chris Pugh into this as well. What are the most effective ways for new composers to meet directors, filmmakers? For you, David, first of all, what would you say to people who are just starting out, apart from don't start out?
Yeah, I'm always encouraging people to give up because we don't need the competition. I mean, everyone finds their own way eventually, and my own experience is the only thing I can talk about with any authority, obviously. And I did a thing once at West London University where I had to give a talk to some students on the subject of your big break. What is your big break? And I thought about it for a long time about what my big break was. And I realized that actually my big break was when I was 19 or 20. I met a young sort of film student director called Danny Cannon in Luton, an old hat factory that had been converted into better part of an art centre. And in Luton, the hat factory is an art centre. So he always wanted to say he wanted to make movies, and I always said I wanted to score films. And so he was 16, I was 19, 20. And we spent many years making silly little things together, some serious things together. And eventually Danny gets into the National Film and Television School as a directing student. I applied and didn't get in. I didn't have any formal compositional qualifications, but I'd done everything that he had done. Anyway, he carried on through his sort of 4-year time at the National, and I carried on sneaking in and doing things with him and other students that were there as well, never being allowed to use any of the equipment. So all the rest of the time doing pretty sort of bottom level jobs, temp agency work, the sort of thing where no one wants to touch the horrible, ugly pile of things in the corner, so they call a temp guy to come in and do it. Those kinds of things, which lets you learn a lot about people, which is hugely important, I think, in this business. And eventually Danny graduated, got his first feature film called The Young Americans, and convinced the producers that I should do it. And I did, and it was great. And then someone heard that in America and decided they wanted me to do Stargate, and that's how that happened. But what is your big break? My big break was meeting Danny when I was 20 and he was 16. So for a lot of people, you may have met the person already who's going to be the one who's going to give you, the chance to do something a little bit broader and a bit bigger. And never take those things for granted. I think when you're starting off, relationships are the most important things that you can try and develop. And I think relationships that develop at a level that you are at is going to be far more productive. I've been in a production office where I've seen stacks of, CDs, or then DACs and then drives of composers trying to get a gig. And you don't want to be one of those 300 people. You want to be the person who the director says, this is the guy that I want. So I pay a lot of close attention to the people that you're working with at the moment, who, you know, may not yet have got to that level, but when they do, one would hope that they take you with them.
Do you think it's any different now than it was when you started, or are these sort of universal truths in a way?
Well, I mean, it's difficult because I'm not starting now, you know. I mean, it's the strange thing about it is I have no experience about what it's like now to be starting. I mean, from what I can observe, I think there's an awful lot more content available. You know, there's a lot more content that needs music writing for it. I mean, we know we've got issues with streaming rates, but, you know, the fact that Amazon and Netflix and Apple now, as well as the sort of main broadcasters, are producing a hell of a lot of original content, and that's a hell of a lot of work around. So that's good. What's bad about it is, you know, streaming rates, everyone's still a little bit up in the air about what they actually mean, and you know, what they can ever really add up to. So those shows have to be directed by people, and the more there is, and the more demand there's going to be for producers and writers and editors and composers and DOPs to do this work. So I mean, I think there is an awful lot of it about. Yeah. But I think it's more personality driven. I think you're much more likely to be brought along onto a bigger project rather than discovered. You know, I think that's probably still a universal truth. Definitely. But obviously it might not be.
Your mileage may vary. Dan, it's one of those things about sort of, because everybody's experience is so unique in terms of their own journey, then extrapolating out any useful general comments that would apply to someone else seems almost impossible. But what's your take on it now?
I mean, I think the thing that's really interesting is you talk to any composer, everyone has a different story generally about how they got in. And I think that's something really worth bearing in mind. Like, all of us have had a different way into the industry, and there's no one like, do this happens, and this happens, and you get a big film. And there's sort of things that suggest that happens, where you go and, you know, become a minion for some big composer. But, you know, even that is not like a surefire guarantee. So there's no real guaranteed way into the industry, and it never has been. And so I think that's something to always bear in mind, that like I can only give you my answer, David can only give you his answer, and Michael, you can only give your answer. But what's interesting about that is there is no like set path in stone, and it just becomes about kind of improvising your way in. And I think there's a whole bunch of things you can do. I think it's very hard to get that break. You can't just sort of automatically make it happen, but you can kind of make your own luck, because you need luck in this industry, I think. But you can engineer luck by doing a whole bunch of things to like push that more towards that situation. So when I started out, I started out making like music in my bedroom on a little 4-track, and I was just making music and just giving tapes to people. Like, I was just a pain in the ass. And even David knows this, because when I was 21 on my 21st birthday party, I turned up at a talk that David did, and I was like, hey man, take my tape. And David was like, I can't take your tape, it's against the rules.
Have you still got it, David?
I did take it.
Is it going to be on eBay?
I did take it. It was at the National Film Theatre.
Yeah.
And for some reason, someone thought that I should talk about film music. And I remember very clearly that Dan came up with a DAT and gave it to me. And I also remember going home and listening to it and dropping him an email saying, "You don't need any help from anyone." You know, it seemed very clear to me then that, you know, he had everything that he needed to get where he's obviously got. So, you know, you think incredibly quickly, but it's quite a long time. You know, from that point when you think you're ready to the point when you actually are ready. And I remember seeing Dan's credits like on TV all the time. And I kept saying, that's that guy who gave me the DAT. And I said he was really good. And he's like, look, he's doing this, he's doing that, he's doing that. And then all of a sudden, he's doing everything.
So yeah, I think it's
nothing to do with me. I mean, I'd like to claim credit for it, but
and 15%, please.
I think the thing is, it's like I started off doing stuff in my bedroom, right? I was like going to like weird electronic things, and a director heard some music I'd done. I wasn't even really like, I didn't really know what I wanted to do. I was still pretty young at this time. I was like 16 or 17. And he really liked the music, and he was doing documentaries, and he just asked me to do a TV documentary. Now, obviously everyone would be like, great, I'd love a director to ask me to do that. But it was just a case of making music and him hearing it and saying, can you do this? So I sort of did that. And there's a guy called Paul Wilmshurst, and, you know, he took a great, like, sort of chance on me, but also he was making a really small documentary that had like fuck all budget, and he just wanted some music. And so I did some stuff, and he liked it, and it worked. And so he kept coming back to hire me, and then other people would hire me from that. And I'd say there's sort of two parts to this thing. The first bit is getting your foot in the door, which is, I think, hard. And there'll be loads of people here going, how do I do that? But it doesn't necessarily have to be a film. It doesn't have to be a TV show. It can be anything from, like, I don't know, some dodgy YouTube video for like some terrible influencer or something, or, you know, like some kind of app or video game or anything. I think any place you can try and do work and do really good work, because I always really cared about my work and everything I do, whether it's like the coolest film or the show that you think is possibly a bit beneath you. Love Island.
That is a classic.
You still want to make the best thing you can. And I did that. And I think when I started off in TV music was kind of looked down upon. It was sort of seen as a bit of a like, oh, that's, you know, I just do this to make some money. It's not a proper, a lot of composers had that sort of, you know, that sort of mindset. And I went into it as it's a really great playground to just write good music. And I think there's no race to become like successful and do big films, because once you get that level, it's kind of like you can't turn back, and it's like you either crash and burn or you keep going. And I always say it's a bit like filling your pint glass with beer. Every time you do a job, you're filling it a bit bigger, and every time you do some little project, if you learn something, you're getting more in that glass. And then when you get to, like, I don't know, the sort of super big leagues, you've got no time to deal with like filling that glass up anymore, and all you've got left really is what's left in that glass. So I always think if you're starting out, don't be upset that you haven't got, your career isn't like the biggest thing yet, as long as you're learning each time you do a job. And that's not always about music, it's learning about how to deal with people, like relationships, how to spot car crashes 10 miles off, how to be both like really full of yourself and protective of your work, yet also completely servile and technical. It's a bit like, I always liken it to being a waiter at like a posh restaurant. Full of like sort of wealthy people who think they know what they want, but your job is to try and convince them to try the special and not the hamburger. They're like, I want a hamburger. And you're like, sure, have a hamburger, but I've got a dish that's like a lot more tasty, and why don't I just make that for you first? It's really different, it's a different kind of dish.
You can always have the hamburger if you want to.
Yeah, and I'll make you a good hamburger, and like nothing wrong with a hamburger. It's a great dish, but like every restaurant has hamburgers, and every time you go to the cinema restaurant, hamburgers everywhere. So if you can like cook something up that's a bit different, but I don't know how useful that is for everyone. It's more just, I think.
What if you're vegetarian?
I've got a version made out of lentils.
Grown in a lab.
I think the thing is, what's really important when you're doing work is actually, if you're doing any work, even if you're not getting paid, just enjoy it, because that enjoyment comes through, and doing something that you're proud of is kind of the ultimate reward. Because I would rather be doing small projects so I was really proud of what I was doing, the massive Hollywood films where I thought everything I was doing was kind of generic rubbish. And every time you do some good work, it feeds on. I think a really great example is Mika Levi, who, you know, has not got like a ton of credits to her name. And, you know, after Under the Skin, everyone's like, oh my God, I want her to do my movie, because that was such a groundbreaking, different work. And you compare that to lots of other composers who've done like zillions of scores, but they don't sound as different. And I think it's, you know, it's making something unique that you put your own sort of passion into is the answer to like moving up quicker, and also not being a jerk.
Not been a twat. I think you both, Dave and Dan, you both were doing big movies in your 30s, if the number calculation is right. And do you think that, I mean, that's the exception rather than the rule? And how do you think that then informs, because from your 30s to your 40s to your 50s to onwards, it's quite a long period of time. Do you, Dave, have you sort of wanted to diversify and do other stuff, whether it's musicals or songwriting? How does it, if you're doing that high octane stuff early on, for you, has that meant that you've wanted to do different stuff later on, or just sort of more of the same?
I think it's interesting. I think also what Dan says about, you know, the work ultimately being the most important thing is true. When you're starting off and you've got no money, you don't feel quite the same. I mean, it's like, you know, people say like, you know, like money can't do this and we can't do that. And you say, I haven't got any, but I'm you know, sometimes, you know, you'd like to be able to have the choice of knowing what it's like to do something which is really successful, which, you know, sort of pays you enough money for you to be able to make choices and make those decisions. I always felt from a very early stage that I only really wanted to do things that I really liked, because I knew how much it costs you in terms of, you know, personal, social, mental strain. You know, I mean, like, it's not easy. Like I said, it's a bit like it's a bit like plate spinning and all the plates are on fire. You know, you've got to keep an awful lot of stuff up in the air at the same time, and it's all quite potentially lethal. But you know, it's like, I mean, I'm obviously I'm very fortunate because I've got, you know, I got to the point reasonably quickly. I mean, I didn't do my first film till I was like 30, 31, and then over the next sort of 10 years, everything went mad. So I'd done a lot of big films by the time I was 40. And sometimes these things come at you and you think you kind of have to, you feel like you want to say yes to everything because you spent so much of your life never being offered anything, not being asked to do a thing. But you do have to be careful about what you do. But I do think the most important thing is that to actually really love what you do and try and find people who you love working with to do it with. Now, I've had experiences, and I know Daniel's had experiences where those things aren't always, you know, present at the same time, and it can be quite tricky. But you learn a lot, and I think the learning is a good thing. For me, I found that, you know, growing up in a house full of music and songs, especially, as much as I love doing films, I didn't just want to do films. So even from the start, I was, you know, doing records, and you know, they did the musical, and I'm working on another one now. And then, you know, in a way, sort of went a little bit, took a step sideways and started doing TV stuff, because I loved the ideas. You know, I mean, I loved, you know, the Sherlock thing that we did. It was like came out of nowhere, and Good Omens was because, you know, one of the directors that I'd worked with before asked me to do Good Omens, and so these things are projects that I love doing, and the people that I did them with, I love doing it with, and I don't care whether it's film or TV or theatre, whatever it is. If it's something I get excited about, all I've got is my day. All I've got is the same 24 hours as you've got, and what I do with that is really important. And I don't want to wake up thinking, oh my God, I've got to go in and work with that person again. Or, you know, this is the 28th version of 1M1, you know, and still not really an explanation as to why they think it is or it isn't working. You know, those things make me feel a bit ill because, you know, I love doing music, and I don't like sort of stretching it to the point where it's no fun. So right back to the start of all this was that I said to my agent very early on, and I mean, I got Stargate without having an agent, but the agent that I got then on Stargate, who I still got now, I said to him the very first time I met him, I said, don't tell me what you think is best for me. I'd rather make my own mistakes and my own choices because I don't want to have to blame anyone. You know, I don't want to say like, oh God, well, he told me to do it, so I did it. You know, I said, I really am happy doing what I'm doing the way that I want to do it. And so waste time saying this is going to be good for your career and this is something you should do. Because if I intrinsically feel that I don't really want to do that, then I don't care if it's good for a career. The same as the sort of moving to Los Angeles, you know, the pressure very early on in the 90s to move to Los Angeles. But all that would mean was just doing more, just more and more in the same room, you know, not seeing anyone, not doing anything, more and more and more. And you end up with a ton of credits, which is great. But, you know, I think now, like with all this sort of lockdown stuff, you think, am I happier not having spent the last 10 years locked away doing a bunch of films rather than doing some TV stuff, some theatre stuff, some concert stuff? Yeah, I am much happier having done that, because ultimately that's all I've got left. All I've got is the day and what I do with it. So I'm not quite sure what question I've answered there, Michael. But,
it's a chat. There's no strict question and answer policy. That's very good. Can I Dan, talk about records now, and for the same, there's a big sort of often asked question about recording artist versus composer these days, in the sense that a lot of productions are looking for people who are kind of recording artists first and film and TV composers perhaps second. Again, just framing it in terms of perhaps some of the people who are starting out. What is your take on that? If you were doing it again, would you be self-releasing some more, or?
Well, I mean, like the artist thing, I have like a good and a bad thing about it, right? Like, so the good thing I think is interesting is when artists are given the keys to doing a film or TV soundtrack, they, like, as we all know, making film or TV music is actually really hard. It's not just like, hey, this sounds filmic, and I'll put it on the Cool Explosion, and hey, I'm a film composer. Because a lot of film music is a guy walks from here to here out of the door in 30 seconds, and you've got to somehow not make it feel lame.
Yeah.
And so what's interesting, I find sometimes when artists do scores, is they haven't learned the rules, and sometimes they'll do things that are like potentially really clunky or like really unexpected ways of getting themselves out of trouble, which a lot of film TV composers have learned, oh, this will get me out of here. And sometimes you get really interesting results from that because they haven't learnt shortcuts, which I think can be good, but also dangerous as a composer. But then on the other side, they've got power and their opinion is respected. Whereas film and TV composers, you are kind of having this, like, going back to the waiter analogy, you're the waiter, whereas when an artist turns up, it's like the chef's coming to serve you.
Oh yeah, so, white coat, big hat.
So sometimes it can be good, but a lot of the time, I think it's difficult because I think film and TV writing is very difficult. I think it's just like the actual craft of it is something that takes like years and years and years to learn properly. I mean, not necessarily learn properly, because I think someone can knock out the first thing as a score and it can be way more interesting than someone who's had 20, 30 years experience.
Yeah.
But you can't do that constantly, I don't think. And I think there's a push from a marketing-driven area of people wanting names attached to projects. There's so many projects now, people just want names. And I do find it a bit insulting sometimes when, like, there's certain films, like there's a film recently, which I'm not going to mention, but they got a artist to do the score, and it didn't work. Like, you could hear the bits that they're done, and they got someone else to end up rescoring the rest of the film. So you had these two very juxtaposed scores that didn't work as a continuity. And I know if that director had gone to an interesting film composer and said, look, give me an interesting score, a really good film composer would just jumped at it and made something really special and thought about the through line, thought about how they could have recurring themes or a sonic palette that would work. Because it's all very well writing cool tracks, but film music is not just about writing cool tracks. It's about writing things that that can work in multiple different ways, different scenarios, and different parts of a film. And it's even just down to like spotting and how you know when to do a change. Like one of the things I think I'm quite good at is working out how to break down a scene and like work out, I'm going to change here, I'm going to change here, I'm going to change here, I'm going to highlight this bit. And that's something that takes years. And I spend a lot of time trying to make my scores sound really simplistic, like I've just knocked it out in 2 seconds. And sometimes I have just knocked it out in 2 seconds. But a lot of the time, it's actually quite hard to try and make it really simple. So when those changes hit, they feel really natural and like I'm not really doing anything. It just happens to hit there. But that is a result of loads of work to make those things happen. So I think the artist thing is going to stick around for a bit, because I think we're going to get into a lot more of a celebrity-driven culture, which I don't think is particularly good. And there are less areas now for artists to do creative projects. But at the end of the day, I don't think it will stick around for very long, because it's really hard writing film music, and it's like a proper craft. It's like getting, I don't know, Jay-Z to come around and like refit your boiler. It's like, you could be like, hey everyone, I got Jay-Z to redo my boiler. And he's like way better at refitting boilers than Barry the boiler guy. But then it's like,
you still need Barry the boiler guy to come around afterwards.
It's a bit of a botch job. I had to get Barry in at the end to sort it all out. And now my boiler's like this golden shiny thing that like uses up, the heat doesn't refract very well. So that's a bit of a crap metaphor. But at the end of the day, once you've got Jay-Z fixing your boiler a couple of times for like £2 million, the novelty is going to wear off, I think.
I think that's really interesting. David, I'm going to sort of move into a social media question to ask you sort of the same question again, because we had a question from Gemma Jeffrey. Do you have any advice on how a composer, especially a young composer, can use social media to promote themselves and network? Do you think, to Dan's point about the kind of celebrity culture, if you like, of people looking for composers or looking for people to score their films who are sort of famous, do you think it matters for young people to try and actively do that? Become famous, that is. Become an influencer.
Well, it's interesting if you think, Dan was talking about, people in bands making film scores, and you think like John Barry was in a band before he did a film. Danny Elfman was in a band. Hans Zimmer was in a band. A lot of people find their way into this industry and learn how to do all those things that Dan was talking about. They're not completely mutually exclusive. You could be, like Trent Reznor. You could be a person who can make great records and understand, the storytelling aspect of writing film music. They're not mutually exclusive, but I do take the point that sometimes you get the feeling that someone's just found a great preset that goes, and then it sounds like film music, and you think like, well, maybe I can do this. And then you rely on like amazing music editors to make those things work. If you think about Johnny Greenwood or Nick Cave, Warren Ellis, people who are doing quite brilliant work whilst maintaining a career in record songwriting as well. As far as social media is concerned, I think there's a danger that you might end up. I remember a phrase once that I heard, which was, "If everybody's an artist, who's the audience?" And sometimes you think you're sort of, talking to a bunch of people who kind of want to do the same thing that you do. You're not talking to the people who are the filmmakers or the people who are going to provide you with the opportunities, or the writers. Get some interesting script writers or young producers or people with new ideas or new way of presenting work. And it doesn't necessarily have to be film or broadcast. There's plenty of exciting stuff going on in theatres around the world where you can, there's some amazing music being written for theatre, and a lot of time those people, come out, theatre directors like Rupert Gould, Sam Mendes, people have come from theatre and have done amazing sort of cinematic work as well. So all these things, are all possibilities, and they're all worth attending to. You know, I know that, you know, that in terms of like record companies like to count the, you know, how many Instagram followers you got, how many Twitter followers you got, you know, like Facebook, you know, the whole thing, you know, your socials, you know, if you're an artist, I think the social aspect of it is essential. You know, and the fact that you have to kind of provide something new almost every week is quite a lot of pressure. You know, I know artists that have to dedicate an hour a day to purely attending to social media, putting things that are interesting, having photographs taken. This is me doing this. This is me doing that. Even if it's like, you know, I'm writing a song or I'm tuning a guitar or, you know, frying an egg. It's like, you know, it's like you kind of have to constantly be in people's faces. The problem with that is that things seem to only last for a day. You know, like people release something and it's like for a day it's like bang, this album's out, and then tomorrow it's like, now what? You know, it's become quite oddly, you know, disposable. And I think the way that maybe people listen to music has changed a lot as well. You know, the move towards tracks rather than albums for certain people. But then, you know, you go to Glastonbury or Reading, and, you know, there's plenty of bands on that people still feel very passionately about. So maybe it's not all bad, but I mean, social media, I don't like PR for me. It's like, I'm not quite sure what the advantages are. You know, someone from a PR agency once told me that, you know, the reason why I hadn't got nominated for an Oscar because I hadn't hired a PR company to do a PR campaign for me for whatever the scores were. And I just immediately thought, well, if that's what it's all about, then that doesn't feel necessarily something that I'm particularly interested in. And the value of it, you know, you know, in the same argument, becomes sort of lessened by knowing that as a thing. So, you know, some people do PR very well. You know, I mean, Hans is a master of it. You know, he's like not only in the fact that he's very present, but also, you know, he gathers, you know, lots of famous people around him as well. You know, when he's doing a score, he will come up with some amazing idea which involves having 75 Keith Richards all playing at the same time, or something like that. You know, something notable, something which makes you go like, oh, that's exciting. You know, so there's loads of stuff that he does which really sort of grabs your attention, and he'll do something sort of unique and completely different and unusual, and people know him, you know, and he's doing these enormous tours now, and people are going to see him because, you know, that's all worked. But, you know, there's only one of him, and everyone else, you know, it's a different sort of world, I think. So I think it's just as much as you kind of want to get out of it. If you think like, how many directors do you know are sort of scrolling through Twitter looking for composers, you know, who might have put something up? I don't know. I would imagine most of them, you know, I think most great talent is noticed reasonably quickly. You know, I don't think there's that much undiscovered talent in the world that doesn't rise to the surface, you know, fairly quickly. We all know when something is amazing. You know, we all know when something comes up that we've never seen. God, have you heard that? That's incredible. What you do after that is the bigger problem. But so socials, I think, really, it's horses for courses. You know, maybe it's just, you know, generationally. But, you know, I look at producers and they're kind of interested in the people that have already made the journey. You know, that have already sort of got to a point where, you know, they grab your attention. And maybe part of that journey is social media, but I do think you have to be careful about who it is that you're talking to. You know, so if it's a bunch of other people who wanting to do the same job and everyone's going, you know, being supportive, which is lovely, but they're not going to be the ones offering you work.
Very true. Very true. Dan, changing tack on.
Everyone's kicking off about artists on the chat thing. I
good.
Very clear. I think there are loads of fantastic scores made by artists. I don't have any problem with artists scoring films. What I have a problem is the fact we're making a difference already between film composers and artists. And that, for me, is the problem, is that there's a view that film composers aren't really artists. They're just hacks who just do any old stuff. And then there's artists who are people who have a far higher view on music. And I think that's the thing that's sort of, I find sometimes testing, is that, you know, I'm not really seen as an artist. I'm kind of seen as a film composer, which is fine. I quite like slipping under the radar, but I know loads.
Yeah, but that,
yeah.
If you seriously wanted to be perceived like that, you could very easily do it. You know, you spend whatever it is, 20 grand a month on a PR campaign.
Oh yeah, but the thing is,
and you're everywhere. You know, it's very, you know, that's really the only difference.
I don't actually care, because the thing I've always been about, that I always want my work to be louder than me. I'm quite loud, but I always think the most important thing for me has always been the work is louder than me. Which kind of could, like in radio disc jockey style, lead me nicely onto the social media thing, where I think good work is the most powerful thing you can do. And, you know, you look at, like, social media can be an interesting way to amplify good work. But I don't think anyone's going to hire anyone serious who you want to work with will be hiring you because you've got like a load of social media followers, or you've got like a funny picture of your dog or something on social media. They're going to hire you because you do really good work. And you look at people like Desplat and stuff like that. He's not on anything. And I think it can be useful to be a tool to make your work better known, and to like kind of throw out propaganda about what you do. And like I always try and, like, I'm on Twitter and that's about it, and I'll only really use it for like shameless propaganda of like trying to show creative process. And I have a whole thing which is like don't ever try and sell envy, because I think social media is, so much of it is built around envy. And if you can make a sort of like promise to try not to promote envy as your output, I think that's very successful, because I think advertising is all about envy and making you feel inadequate about your life, so you go buy something. And I think the thing about social media that's been interesting is like loads of people have just ended up co-opting that mindset of trying to make other people envious. And actually, I think you want to highlight creative process and highlight things about your work that make people understand your work better. But I think if it's a choice between doing a really good social media campaign or making a really good track or a really good piece of music, always go for the good piece of music and the good track.
Well said, sir. Well said. Teams, moving on to process. So we had quite a few questions about like how everybody works practically. One of the questioners has wanted to stay anonymous, as said, because I think they've got a gig coming up, and their point, because there is a younger composer that was saying about how do you work with the teams of people around you? In their case, a team of people who you would normally work for and are much older and more experienced than you. So I think that's this person's having to step up onto a project and then needs to hire people around them. You know, what are your thoughts on terms of whether it's orchestrators, assistants, programmers, music editors, just everybody that makes it all tick? What do you reckon, David?
I've never really had like a team as such. You know, I don't have my own ensemble. You know, I don't have in-house.
They're all behind that screen. That's what the screen's up.
It's
behind that screen. Everyone's turning out the next series of Jacula.
Yeah, no, I just the people behind the screen are busy writing great things about me on Twitter, Dan. So I can be famous and do a film. But we all know that, you know, it's virtually impossible to get a project across a finishing line without assistance. And I mean, I'm lucky that when I started off, I just worked with Nick Dodd, who just did orchestrating, and that was it, really. I did most of my own sort of playing and programming. Then met a couple of people who I thought were really interesting as programmers, and started doing things with them. Did a few films, and then they move on, and it kind of works like that. You know, you have a couple of years with people who are like, you know, lucky you're in the same place at the same time. If something comes up and said, "Do you fancy doing this?" And I always do it on a sort of film by film basis, because, you know, the people that I've been lucky enough to work with are certainly good enough to be doing their own thing anyway. And so you don't want to be a person who's kind of saying, I don't want to hold anyone back, or say, like, you know, you've got to commit to doing that. You know, I feel lucky that, you know, that people want to work with me on things, as and when, you know, I ask and they're available. So always very grateful for incredibly talented people coming on board and making my life easier, because that's what it is. There is so much to do. I could do it all. I used to do it all. But I mean, even in my, you know, reasonably brief foray into media composing, which is like about 20 years, 25 years now, I suppose. You know, it's gone from, you know, it's a very analog situation in those days. It's gone from that and through that, where it would, you know, you'd be recording everything on analog tape, seeing digital tape, and then seeing tape disappear and Pro Tools turn up. You know, going from me starting off working off a 16mm print to a VHS, to a U-matic, to a digital screener, and all this stuff compresses the amount of time that you have to do the work that you have to do. And it used to be that when I was doing a film, even a sort of smallish film, you'd have about 10 or 12 weeks, you know, to get it done, which was sort of comfortable. But now it's more likely to be sort of 6 to 8 weeks is the expectation. And not only that, but you've got to kind of do the whole thing twice. You know, you've got to sort of demo the thing to the point where it's good enough to play people that it's almost finished. And that was something I never used to have to do. I mean, when I was doing Stargate, I think I demoed about 3 or 4 cues.
Right.
Very roughly then, because, you know, I didn't have the equipment. And B, the equipment wasn't that sophisticated either. So it was a kind of like, roughly, this is what it is. These are the themes. This is roughly this scene. This is roughly, and they probably didn't hear 80% of the score until we were on the scoring stage, which is terrifying. But it had always been like that.
You think that's...
I mean, I remember Alfred Hitchcock once was talking about Bernard Herrmann. You know, he was saying, you know, Mr. Hitchcock, what do you think about film composing? He goes, well, I hate them. He goes, they sit down with their piano and they go, this is going to be a horn, and this is going to be a violin, and this is going to be a flute. That's a flute. He goes, and then you get to the stage and you say you don't like it. It's too late now. Too late now. Got the band in, got to do it. You know, so it's got to the point now where you have to kind of present the finished thing in its completion. And Dan, with the electronic hybrid stuff as well, you know, it's like all that stuff's got to be recorded, and so, you know, I think if you're lucky enough to be able to employ or have the help of talented people, it makes everything better, because you could be getting on with other aspects of composition, and it might be that you can put a rough guitar track down and then give it to, you know, a brilliant programmer, a guitar player, and say, can you just make that much better? And they will make it much better, and you can get on with the more of the job, which is writing the music, you know, making sure that it's the right stuff that you're asking people to do. But I've never been a big team of people, you know. I mean, I've just been lucky to work with, you know, 2 or 3, probably, you know, maximum, but usually just 1 or 2.
Yeah. Do you think, I've got a question actually, like for David. Stargate is like such a popular score for people, and what I find interesting is about like scores that were made a while back and then like a lot further back, was the fact that because we didn't have to demo every single element, it meant you could write in a different way and write a lot more musically. I think one of the problems we've got today is you have to write in a different style, because you couldn't get, it would be very hard to demo up a score like that these days, in terms of like...
Well, I'll tell you what I think the difference is, Dan, with that, is that I think we are now very much under the kind of thumb of your click track, of working in a digital audio workstation, whereby the natural way that you write is horizontally. You know, the first thing you do when you're writing a piece is that you kind of find a tempo. And so you put that into your Logic or Cubase for 120 BPM. And there it goes, right? From that point on, unless you're really, 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 really careful, that thing is going to tell you what to do. Because you kind of start feeling the thing in bars of 4. If you write vertically, then you would write the moment to the point where you think we could change here. And it might be that that's a bar of 5. And then you know, then you would change tempo. You'd slow down to a point where you can then reach the next bit, and you calculate where these peaks and troughs are, and where the decrescendos and the crescendos are, and where the accels are, and where the ticello is. All these things happen vertically. It's much more difficult to do that when you've got a dictator doing that. And so you tend to write then in a line and then fill it in. You write a single blast at it at that tempo, you know, and then you go back and then you start filling in. But that's not the same as kind of sort of 3-dimensional, you know, vertical writing, if you know what I mean. And Stargate was written like that. I mean, I had it was a Pro 24 on an Atari that I did the sort of basic sort of mock-ups and things in. But I was using a different system for tempo mapping, whereas I would get a book full of notes from a music editor that thick, with all the timings of where the action happened and where people said what, and you could look at the timings and you could feel the point when you're looking at the scene. You could feel the point where if you didn't have this thing doing that all the time, where you would naturally feel like you would kind of ebb and flow a little bit more with it. And then you would work it out either with a calculator or a stopwatch, and then you would have the tempo maps for Stargate were all over the place. You know, there were hundreds and hundreds of changes in every cue, and then as soon as we got into the more sort of sequential writing, it becomes quite dictatorial, and I think it's a really good idea to avoid that if you can. Unless you want it to be like that, obviously.
Dan,
yeah, I guess.
Yeah.
Go on, Michael.
I was just going to say, because I mean, it's part of your background was in dance music to begin with. Do you sort of like how do you feel about the tyranny of the click? Is it something that you kind of?
Pretty bad. I mean, my stuff is pretty like I end up doing stuff that is quite solidly like on the grid often because. But there's a bunch of reasons. One, I'm sort of writing stuff if I'm writing stuff that's very lyrical and a bit more kind of musical, so to speak, then it's great to try and do that. But the thing that's really hard is you have to constantly deal with people re-editing the film, re-changing stuff. And whenever you put in like big tempo changes, they'll change the scene. Like if you try and write a musical score, it's very difficult when they keep recutting the picture over and over again. If you have something to work with, like on Black Mirror, USS Callister, I actually had a cut to work with that was locked pretty much. I was writing an orchestral score, so I got to write something that was actually, in parts, a lot more lyrical and not always bang on the click. But the trouble is, I find, is like, it gets changed the next day, it gets changed the other day. Yeah. And the sort of thing you've got to do is you've got to deliver. And you've got to work out the best way you can to deliver a good score. And if that means you have to approach it in a slightly more modern, I don't mean modern because that sounds like it's better. I just mean like a more modern process. Yeah. Because you're going to have to deal with them. Because at the end of the day, going back to the hamburger analogy, they don't care how the hamburger turns up, right? Yeah. If you got to go like assassinate a cow, like make that. Like the way you want to make it, they don't care. They just want a hamburger, and you've got to try and make the best one you can. And if they're used to having it in 5 minutes as opposed to like 5 hours, that's going to change how you do your kind of mincemeat making. It's going to be
how your cow culling goes.
I would love to do like more non-tempo-y stuff because it is, you sit at a piano and you play something and you just play it completely differently. I think, someone mentioned Vangelis earlier. And one of the things that's amazing about Vangelis is, he was writing electronic music, but had really developed a technique and a system that allowed him to play dynamically, both like volume and tempo, and still let that work within a kind of electronic world. I think there's many other electronic composers who've ever really mastered that. And the way we work now is very electronic and not, you know, it's not, you're writing for an orchestra, but you're not writing for an orchestra the way you sort of should write for an orchestra. And the way you think about it, when you get a score, like I'm sure I've got some scores kicking around, just like, look, here's a score. Bub, 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 bub. You know, as soon as you get it, you look at it differently, and you like looking at the score, and you start pulling apart. And like for me, when I do something, once it gets notated, that's like a second chance to look at the piece with a different mindset on, rather than the sitting in front of the computer one. We should all do more tempo changes. John Lunn does that, the composer. Rob Lane. Rob Lane was obsessive about these tempo maps. But that means that when like the director phones up saying we need this thing to be done, or the music editor goes to drop it up because they've recut the scene, you're screwed.
It's hard. Yeah, exactly.
Well, I mean, just to let you know, on Stargate, the last 2.5 weeks of Stargate was me and 3 other people with scores all over the hotel room floor where I was working, trying to get them to fit the new picture. I mean, it was like I think one queue had 11 versions, and that was old school 11 versions. You know, we're actually rubbing stuff out, cutting the score, sellotaping it, adding an extra beat there, putting an extra beat there, and then trying to find ways of musically making all this kind of butchery work. But you know, it's like everything has a price, and I think the problem that you have, that Dan put his finger on with his Black Mirror episode, was that when you are concertinaed in post-production, then it's not going to allow you to do the best work, because you kind of have one go at it. You know, I mean, if you've got an extra 4 or 5 weeks or 6 weeks, you can have a run at it. You can sit back. You can think, is this the best that it can be? You know, a lot of the times I've got to the end of something and I've come up with an idea and I think, God, if only I'd have known that at the beginning, I would have done all this differently. But now I haven't got time to do it differently. And I know there's time constraints on everything. But, you know, even like on Stargate, it was, you know, I had to get music students in, and basically, because it was all on paper as well, you know, this is where the cut is. You know, they've made a 1.2 second cut at this frame. So we've got to take that out, you know, to the right, and then bring everything else in. And then, of course, everything else is out of sync. So it was just an exercise in, you know, those films like with Russell Crowe when he was writing all the math stuff on the windows.
Beautiful.
There's a bit like that. It's just like paper everywhere, and a master kind of music editor Bible of where the film was today. And literally going around saying, we need to lose 1 beat there, we need to calculate that, okay, we don't need to change that, we can go 3 BPM faster for 2.5 beats there and make up for it. You know, all this stuff. It's like thinking about it now, thinking, you know, it's no wonder you don't do that many of those big ones, because they do drive you mad.
Gents, your time is precious, and I promised an hour.
Not at the moment.
Well, I just wanted to come back to each of you.
I mopped a toilet this morning.
You mopped a toilet?
Successfully?
I mopped one. Well, the floor, not the toilet. I'm not going to mop a toilet.
David, is that like a euphemism? When you get caught by the police in that public toilets, and you're like, "Oh, I'm just mopping it, sir."
Yeah. But also, I did it with eco-minded. I did it with white vinegar and bicarb of soda, actually, which is a more effective cleaning method and kinder to our environment.
Does it smell like a chip shop in there?
Do you know what? Actually, it does. Obviously, it does smell like vinegar. And then, you know, I mean, unless your chip shop serves, you know, fish and bicarb of soda, maybe it does. But it's a slight vinegary twang. But it's lovely. It's lovely watching it cut through the grease.
Excellent.
Like a good snare drum.
Dan, any final words for? So we've had 218 people actually, and almost everybody's stayed. So thanks for everybody who's been on the chat. Almost everybody.
What did we say?
This is a good thing about it. You can't see people walking out.
Virtually, there should be a little thing.
I did a talk to some kids in Miami recently for like a favor for someone, like some students, and then back in the classroom, there's like two kids just like, it's like being a teacher messing around. I'm like, what are you two? Shut up.
That's the joy of just being able to see the chat room. Dave, any final thoughts?
If that had been Jay-Z, they would have been like agog. You should have just said, look, you know what, my work is louder than me.
Yeah. So my boiler is louder than me.
Yeah. I've got who have I got coming around a bit later? I've got I'm trying to think of any celebrities. I can't think of anyone. I've got Calvin Harris is coming around to fix some shelves.
Of course he is. Come on, Calvin. So I'm going to wrap up there. Thanks very, very much for everybody. There'll be another one next Monday. The chat will be on the chat archive, will be on the website. This video will be on YouTube by tomorrow if we can get around to it. So look out for the mentoring scheme. The whole idea of these is not just to give us something to do while everybody's locked down, but is to just try and give a bit of a focus to help everybody.
Oh yeah, I'll say one thing.
Oh yeah.
People locked down. You're locked down, you've got nothing to do, right? Learn one piece of like gear, like one plugin, or I don't know, just learn one thing for a whole day. Fiddle with every knob on, I don't know, one kind of plugin and learn.
All the euphemisms.
Crazy. Yeah. Or just like one synth for one piece of gear. Just spend a whole day trying to learn everything you can do with it and all the things you shouldn't be doing with it, but kind of make cool noises. Again, more euphemisms, David. But I think the problem we have now is we have so much gear and so much options of things we can learn and play with that you never really master anything. You go, oh, that's a good noise, I've worked that out. And I think I'm guilty of this as much as everyone else. But those moments when you really learn, like, oh, this is what, if I'd like to put two feedbacks into each other on a delay, it makes this crazy noise, which I could then sample and then do something else. And then you've got like a cool tool that no one else has got because you've worked it out rather than like copying everyone else. Or mop the toilet with David's excellent
vinegar.
It was a MIDI mop.
MIDI mop.
Very high tech. A Roland one.
I could see Hans saying that on his next score. It's like
the best mop in town. Gents, thank you so much for your time.
The only other thing is don't forget that there are a million ways to do this. You know, I mean, you're going to be able to. I mean, this. You know, the great thing about this is you hear a lot of people talking about the way that they do it and the things that they think, but you know, the world of music and film and production has very, very broad shoulders, and there is no right way to do anything. You know, you find your own way to do it. I always like listening to the way that other people do it. I still think that other people know better ways of doing it than I do, and I still ask those questions. How do you do this? What string library are you using? What's that brass sample? You know, I always think that someone else has got the magic answer to how to make this job easier, and they haven't, and no one has. You know, all you can do, it's a bit like parenting. You know, you basically try and stay on the surfboard and stay upright as much as you can, because everything's going to be changing all around you, and there is no right way and there is no wrong way. There's only, you know, your way, and if you know the reasons why you're doing it, that's the most important thing. The most important thing is being able to explain to someone why you're doing it the way that you're doing it, and that can be throwing a dustbin full of forks down a lift shaft, or
copyright,
or Paganini.
But also, I think if we both managed to somehow eke a career out of it, like, you know,
you feel like a bit at the end of Bake Off, you know, when people say, "Look, if I can do it, you can do it.
Yeah,
you know, if I can do it, anyone can do it."
I can somehow.
I think that's true, Dan. If you can do it, anyone can do it.
My amazing studio. This is not like a kind of, you know, massive complex with like hundreds of people in. It's me
that we can see.
With, you know, like
hello.
things, and you know, just you know, it's just.
I'm not quite sure what that is. I think I might have seen something like it
not
somewhere. I had to hand over my credit card details before I saw any more. I know that much.
Gentlemen, thank you so much for your time. This could easily go on for the rest of the afternoon and probably will behind the scenes. So thanks very much, everybody. See you all next week.
Thanks, David and Michael. Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Bye. Bye, Dan. Bye. Don't touch any humans.